The International Monetary Fund has called for caution in the use of cryptocurrencies, describing it as a concern. The global body disclosed this during a virtual briefing on the recently published 2020 article of the published 2020 article IMF staff report for Nigeria. The resident representative of IMF for Nigeria, Mr. Ari Asin, says the concern on the use of cryptocurrencies was why many central banks were cautious about the development. Mr. Asin notes that some of the activities might be illegal or related to money laundering and drug peddling. This, he says, was why many monetary authorities had been concerned about how best to supervise and increase their oversight regarding the use of cryptocurrencies. Mr. Asin also called for unification of foreign exchange rates in the country so as to make the management of the rates more effective and transparent across the country. Nigeria's manufacturing sector is among the largest in Africa, with a contribution of 8 to 9% to the sector contributes over $30 billion to the country's gross domestic product. Despite increased access to the ports and local sourcing of materials as a result of government's backward integration policy, improvements in local manufacturing confidence in the economy is challenged by the precarious state of infrastructure, poor implementation of policies on availability of foreign exchange, lending rates, and poor patronage. However, the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, which brought about lockdowns and restrictions, had a significant impact on Nigeria's manufacturing sector, putting businesses at risk of declines in earnings. According to the Manufacturers CEO's Confidence Index, MCCI, for the fourth quarter of 2020, released by the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, MAN, recorded a decline of 42.06 points from 43.03 points recorded in the third quarter of the year. According to the report, the trend is a strong indication of a lack of confidence of manufacturers in the economy in the whole of 2020, and that the manufacturing sector is indeed gasping for breath. To deliberate more on this and other issues facing Nigeria's manufacturing sector, I have joining me now live via Skype from Lagos. He is the Director General of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Mr. Segun Ajayi Kadiru. Thank you very much, DG, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, DJ, I'm going to start straight with the issue of confidence and what the CEOs have come out to say. Give us an overview of what you put together to finally come out with this report.
Okay, thank you very much. The MCCI that you rightly referred to is a survey that is conducted by Manufacturers Association of Nigeria quarterly. What we do is to basically gauge the confidence of CEOs, more than 400 of them across Nigeria, how they feel about the economy. We basically look at two things: the macroeconomic environment and government policy. So we dwell on how the CEOs perceive these two factors. Also, we have diffusing context where we look at one, the perception about employment, the perception about the business environment, and the perception about the general outlook of production level. So when we gauge all this, we ask the CEOs, how do you perceive this to influence your business now and in 3 months? By the time we looked at all those, we saw, like you rightly said, that their confidence has declined from the third quarter of 2020 to the fourth quarter of 2020.
Now, DG, some of these challenges almost remain the same. We have Forex there. We have issue of transportation, infrastructure, issue of government agencies not letting ease of doing business initiative of government. Now, how do we now sort all of this out, or do we dwell on it one after the other to know the negative impact this has on the sector before we now move on to know how we can address them one after the other?
Yes, it's quite worrisome because there are no new issues. It is just that they have not been resolved. The issue of infrastructure has been there. The issue of lack of access to foreign exchange, to procure our raw materials, our spares, and to retool in some cases, the issue of high regulatory compliance costs, and so many, multiple taxation, and so on and so forth. So the issues have been there. And year in, year out, the CEOs have always indicated that they remain binding constraints that afflict the sector. We have continued to engage government on this, and we are just looking for solutions in order for this situation to improve. If anything, we are even seeing the rate of inflation is rising, and it's quite depressing to think that we need to contend with a higher rate of inflation with all these challenges that we have. So, like you rightly said, they are the same issues, and we are encouraging government, we are in constant dialogue with government to be able to resolve them.
The issue of backward integration to me is key, particularly to issues around Forex, if we can really look inwards to source our materials. DG, how far have we gone in looking inwards to source for materials production in Nigeria?
Yeah, to start with, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria has, more than 5 years ago, launched what we call resource-based industrialization, which effectively backs government's efforts to backward integrate. And government has made some strides, especially in terms of growing the agric sector. However, more is needed to be done in terms of specifically identifying those raw materials that are not available locally. And they are the ones for which we seek Forex. So it is not that we seek Forex just to import any raw material. No, it is those ones that cannot be sourced locally. And we are partnering with government in so many initiatives, especially with the Raw Material Research and Development Council, where we have entered an agreement to even, I think in the coming months, have a conference to identify those raw materials that can be sourced locally. We are also engaging with the academia to be able to promote research to areas where, even though we cannot source them now, we have potential to source them. Government needs to focus on this, because even the hassles of having to import raw materials is enough to discourage an average Nigerian from the proclivity to importation of raw materials. So with concerted effort with government, we should be able to overcome this challenge. But whilst we work at that, it is critically important that government allows Forex to be available to manufacturers who are importing raw materials that are not locally available, and also for their spares and for retooling.
Now, DG, it also takes me to the issue of the AFCFTA, which everyone says is laudable, talking about the big market and the positives that we could get from that market. There are two questions. One is, how competitive are we to actually, take the benefits or get the benefits from this very large market? WTO, we just had the DG in Nigerian. What positives do you also see for the manufacturing sector, looking at these two different initiatives and opportunities that we have?
Okay, the contribution of the manufacturing sector to the continental GDP is only about 11.4%, which is below the global average by 5%. This shows you that manufacturing is lagging behind in terms of the global GDP. However, it remains the single most significant sector that can really allow us to achieve the objectives for which we set out. Africa should produce what is sold and used in Africa. It is only when we achieve this that we can successfully say we are trading amongst ourselves. So it offers a very huge opportunity to integrate Africa, because it's when you do business that you can be fully integrated. It's going to promote our capacity to even retain the scarce foreign exchange that we have, so that we'll be able to get what is not available within the continent. For the manufacturing sector in Nigeria, the supply side constraints that have bedeviled us, which you have mentioned earlier in this interview, continue to constrain our capacity to compete. However, government did conduct a study before we signed on to the agreement. And Manufacturers Association of Nigeria conducted a similar one. We came out with similar results, and that we need to overcome those constraints. It is not just a dry report. It is one that has given indication of those things that we need to address. Happily, the federal government has set up a very important body known as the National Action Committee for the AFCFTA. This committee is interministerial and involves the private sector. It is supposed to allow us to have feedback on what the issues are concerning our competitiveness, to be able to address those constraints that will have made it impossible for us to have a beneficial engagement. We have had calls to recently request for a re-energization of this body so that we'll be able to, all of us, work together, because the thing has started. And there is no way you can operate in an environment where you are not aware of what others are doing. So we are asking for the extension of hands of friendship across the border for us to be able to know what is happening outside of Nigeria. We need to have business intelligence, for instance. We need to have information about what other people are doing, which areas that will be available for us to export, and what are the opportunities for value chain exchanges. So we also ask that the Office of the Trade Negotiation for Nigeria should be able to partner with the NAC AFCFTA so that the private sector is brought into the picture of what is really happening. So I think challenges, there are for us, but the structures are to effectively overcome them and be able to move forward, because other African countries are not waiting. And many of them, all of us know, are targeting Nigeria because we are simply the biggest market in the continent. And there is no way a manufacturer will not look out for where his goods will be best sold. And Nigeria will certainly be the target. Concerning the WTO, essentially there is cheery news that one of our own is the first female, not only that, is the first African to head the WTO. But I think that is where it stops. Apart from her capacity to appreciate what the pains are in a developing economy, she cannot single out the continent if we do not do the right things. So I think it is for us to give her the opportunity to be able to assist Africa. One of the first things I think she needs to contend with is this COVID-19 pandemic, and I've mentioned it before. There has to be the removal of vaccine nationalism that is going to make the poorer countries not to be able to have access to vaccines. Also, she should be able to support a process that allows the licensing or production of those vaccines across the continent. We cannot continue to look up to Europe, America, and Asia to supply us vaccines. There should be an opportunity for us to produce those ones. And according to her last interview, some companies are already in Europe, are already going to India to license the production there. This same thing should be done in Africa. We have so many pharmaceutical industries in Nigeria, for instance, that will be able to leverage on this so that we can produce the vaccines locally and make it readily available for the continent.
Now, you've spoken very well with regards to the AFCFTA, but I want to stay a little bit on that. One more question, talking about the committees that we have in various countries. Now, what discussions do you think, when you come to the round table, especially with manufacturers, what are the major things that you think needs to be put forward to make everybody benefit from this market?
To start with, we need to address the infrastructure constraints. It is not possible for you to have an inefficient port and be able to participate effectively in a continental trade area. There is need for us to ensure that the cost of clearing your goods and the cost of exporting your goods comes down drastically. Like I've said in previous interviews, it is unconscionable that you have the same cost of importing a 40-foot container from China to Nigeria. It is the same as taking it from the port to Agbara a journey that is just less than 27 kilometers. We need to drive down the cost. It will take you 2 to 3 weeks to get your containers cleared, whereas in some other African countries, it takes less than 3 days. Speed to market is essential in this kind of environment. Also, the costs and the supply of power. There has to be a deliberate attempt to ensure that the productive sector is saved this challenge. There are also business intelligence information that is required and can only be gotten by government. We have embassies all across Africa. They should be able to give us information about what is available there in terms of market and what the manufacturers there are doing. We also need to focus critically on the negotiations that are going on, especially the one on rule of origin. We should ensure that we do not have infiltration from third countries that will take advantage of our market. There also has to be constant stakeholders engagement so that the worries that we have, so that the constraints that we have can easily be addressed by the structures that have been set up by government. There are quite a number of issues which we have put at the table of the AFCFTA National Action Committee, and I want to believe that all that we need to do is to get serious about resolving them. AFCFTA is not like any other agreement. If we are talking of our relationship with Europe, America, and Asia, we can say, okay, we're fairly competing with them, but we can't say the same thing about Africa. We should be able to not only compete in Africa, but dominate the African market. I mean, it is important, and all of us just have to work at ensuring that this happens.
Brilliantly said. DG, let's now look at this that also affects every Nigerian, and manufacturers are not left out in this. That's the hike in electricity tariff, the hike in the price of PMS. What do you make of all of this, its impact on the sector and around policy regulation consistency? Where do we go from here? Because in that report, I also read that 2021 might be better or will be better than 2020. So when we put all of this together with all of these challenges we face, what do you expect for the sector in 2021?
Yes, our CEOs were optimistic, but I don't know now whether the optimism is misplaced. To start with, we are almost waking up to the reality of an increase in the price of petrol. We are also waking up to the reality of a possible increase, and it has actually been increased, in the cost of electricity. These two are coming at a wrong time. And I think we have to be able to address the issues. Apart from the cost, there's also the issue of supply, especially for electricity. There is the need for us to ensure that we are not shortchanged. It's like you are going for a 100 meters dash and your legs are tied together. Others are not going to wait for you. We need to be able to overcome these challenges. The optimism we shared was the fact that, one, COVID-19 we thought was going to abate. That too has not abated. If anything, there is a second wave. We are also not expecting that we will have a rise in inflation, though it should be expected because farmers are not able to go to the farms. The insecurity has driven them back. And that's why we are having this increase in food inflation. So I think generally government needs to interact more with the stakeholders, and together we should be able to find solutions to the challenges that we have. These are not the best of times for the economy in Nigeria, and I think all government agencies should be pent up to give the support that is required in the economic space.
So how are manufacturers faring? Your members, how are they faring at this time?
Well, we are not, from what the CEO said, it is evident to you that we are not in the best of times. We are thankful to government that we may not have another lockdown. So we are all trying to pick up the pieces from last year, but we are still confronted with the same challenge. And I think we are working with government. Manufacturers Association of Nigeria has many levels of engagement with government. And we're actually working hard on those to ensure that we're able to overcome the challenges. Otherwise, it is not looking good for the manufacturing sector as we speak.
Director General, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Mr. Segun Ajayi Kadiri. Thank you very much for spending your time with us on Business Nigeria this afternoon. I appreciate this.
Thank you for having me.